Hello, everyone. Welcome or welcome back. Before we get into it, there is something that I have been thinking about a lot that I want to get off my chest. And at first, you're going to think that I'm coming out of left field with this, but it's directly related to what I am trying to do with the Deep Dive project. So bear with me for just a few minutes if you don't mind. I have noticed an interesting trend. I would call it a bit of a troubling one across social media platforms, predominantly on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And I'm sure it is also happening on TikTok, although I refuse to give that app a single shred, a single ounce of my time and energy. But over time, especially as I have started to consume more content from creators who are trying to tackle and discuss really heavy, serious societal issues, that there is this self-censoring that is happening, and it is becoming more and more and more prevalent. It started out just, I would see it every once in a while on YouTube, but I'm seeing it on Instagram and Facebook and pretty much everywhere else. It is bleeding into the mainstream in a pretty significant way, and I have a big problem with it. Say, for example, you have someone who is discussing the topic of suicide. It has become trendy because of the ways that these social media platforms are treating creators and the content that they are making. It has become trendy to no longer refer to the issue by its name. Instead, you make up some maudlin, cartoon-sounding equivalent for it and hope that that is sufficient enough to get your point across. So, for example, on the subject of suicide, it would not be appropriate for a content creator to say, and thus such and such tragically took their own life and committed suicide. No, now they would say, so and so unalived themselves. Unalived is the phrase that we have shoehorned into the place of suicide. It goes even further than that and extends into conversations around human trafficking, which is something that I'm really, really passionate about, and other human rights issues that are adjacent to that. You cannot say child sexual abuse material without being censored. So creators will bleep out significant portions of that phrase in an attempt to work around the filtering system, the algorithm, whatever it is that's in place on whatever platform that they are using. Same for sexual abuse. Same for pornography. We already talked about suicide. I think that this is a problem because if you think about it logically, whether or not you say so-and-so committed suicide or so-and-so unalived themselves, the end result is the same. There is an individual who very tragically, for whatever reason, took their own life because existence here on this planet was too painful for them to continue. I am of the opinion that getting to the bottom of why they took their own life is a much bigger deal than policing the language that we use to describe the action that they did, especially when the term is so publicly known and accepted and recognized. Accurate language is really, really important. Let's take it even a step further because it becomes a safety concern at a certain point. Let's say that you are a parent and you have young children. And this is something that I've seen many, many times, and I just have to shake my head because I don't think parents realize what they're doing. When you teach your child their personal anatomy, eyes, nose, mouth, face, hands, feet, but then when it gets to their genitals, you come up with cutesy little names for them: Cookie, Flower, Willy. That's a problem and a potential safety issue because let's say the unthinkable happens. Again, I would never want this to happen, but it does happen, so let's just be honest about it. The unthinkable happens and somebody harms your child, touches them inappropriately, and they come home and they say, "Mommy, Daddy, so-and-so touched my flower." Well, what does that mean? Because if you have a daughter and you taught her that her entire reproductive system is just her vagina, when really the vagina is only one very small part of it, and you never teach her about her vulva, her labia, her clitoris, anything like that, then if it ever comes time to hold someone accountable for an action that they committed against your child, it's going to be very, very difficult to do that because you're going to have no way of knowing where they were touched. This is something that happens. Human rights activists, anti-human trafficking activists, people who are trying to protect children, they talk about this all the time. Accurate language matters. And I am concerned about it for that aspect, and also because of what I am trying to do here on this platform. With the Deep Dive Project, my entire goal is to present accurate information in a relatively coherent and easy to understand manner and provide my sources so that you can listen to as much of what I have to say as you want to, and then take my information, the sources that I cite, do your own research, and make your own determination of whatever it is that I am talking about. That is really, really, really important, and a sole focus of my work here, because the truth matters. The truth will set you free. But if you cannot use plain, direct, simple, frank language to talk about the subject that you are attempting to address, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of failure. And I don't know what the solution is necessarily, especially if you are someone who relies on these platforms for income. My channel and my platforms are not monetized in any way, so I am not bound to, I do not have to kowtow to the big tech overlords quite as much as somebody who uses this to support themselves would. I understand that. I understand needing to support yourself and make a living and not wanting to rock the boat. But I think that when you put yourself in a position to ostensibly speak truth and shine a light on a problem, then you don't get the comfort and the luxury of not being in a potentially threatening situation where you might not be able to make a livelihood, or where your livelihood may be threatened. Some things are more important than money. And I live in a very capitalistic society, so that is a little bit of a foreign concept to a lot of people, but it is a fact. Some things are more precious, more important than money. And human rights issues, I think, fall under that category. And if they don't, they definitely should. And I consider them to be in that category. So if years from now I am still lucky enough to be doing what I am doing, talking about important issues like this here or anywhere else, and you are still consuming that content at that point, if you ever see me start to change the way that I'm speaking, start to pussyfoot and dance around subjects and act like I am afraid of saying the word, like I am a student at Hogwarts, terrified that he who shall not be named is going to come and kill me in my sleep, call me out for it. Because that means that I have failed if that happens. That means that I have allowed the truth to be subverted by something else. I have every intention of doing everything that I need to make sure that that never happens. And I think that we need to hold each other accountable and encourage each other to speak the truth and to use accurate language and to not be afraid of words. Because at the end of the day, they are just words. And I do not think the thought policing and the word policing and everything else is helpful or a good thing or positive, and I am really concerned about where it could potentially lead later on down the road. So I know that that is a massive sidebar, but I really wanted to bring it up because it is something that I have noticed and it really bothers me, and I think we can do better. Now, all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into the topic of today's video. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Opus Dei. So today we are going to be doing something a little bit different, something that I have never done before, but I have always wanted to do. We are going to be looking at Reddit. Specifically, we are going to be looking at r/Opus Dei Exposed, which is a North American-based Reddit community for people who are survivors of or looking for more information about Opus Dei. It has now surpassed 200 members, which is absolutely amazing. And, you know, I have to think Opus Dei may be able to scare individuals into keeping silent and never sharing about the things that they experienced, but it is going to be really, really hard for them to silence hundreds. And the more people that speak out and shine a light on this thing, the harder and harder it's going to be for Opus Dei to refute the truth. So I am really, really happy that this community has grown and is continuing to grow. And if it's something that you're interested in checking out, then you can find a link for it down below in the description, and probably in a pinned comment as well. But let's go ahead and get into it. So here is the community, and what a wonderful, positive place it is, too. There are so many people on here who are just incredibly well educated and well spoken and have such a grasp on not only Opus Dei and how it is run and operates, but on the church as well, on canon law and the catechism. I have learned a lot from just reading through people's posts and comments, and I want to take the time to share some of the things that people are saying. This is all anonymous, by the way. You can share as much or as little personal information, personally identifying information as you want, and since it's the internet and Reddit and something like this, I encourage people to be cautious with how much personal information that they share, but it's all anonymous, which means that people have the freedom to speak frankly and openly, which is really, really refreshing. And I want to highlight that and show these people speaking their truth and sharing their experiences because I think it's really powerful. So I already have some posts here pulled up, but if you haven't taken a look at this community yet, please go and do so. There are just so many wonderful posts in here, people who are just really, really, really freaking smart. But the first post that we are going to look at today is titled, "How Were You Love Bombed?" And then, "How Were You Dropped When You Were No Longer of Use?" The love bombing thing really drives me up the wall, especially when the supernumeraries who make such an effort when you are on their apostolic radar and then make no effort at all when they realize you are not interested in Opus Dei. At my kids' school, this is so apparent. The supers go after the intended victim, are super friendly, etc., to the point of ignoring the non-radar people around them. I am a non-radar person and have no supernumerary friends at the school. I'm ignored. How can such friendly people ignore and drop you? Other parents have told me of similar experiences. This is not true friendships. It is utilitarianism to the max. It makes me ill thinking about it. The only positive is I don't want fake friends, so I will continue to be an outsider. I really like this thread because there are so many excellent comments in it. We're going to go through them. But again, this is highlighting the experience of supernumeraries in Opus Dei, which I mentioned in my last video, I think are a little bit of an underrepresented group of people, because we tend to think of the numeraries and the numerary assistants as being the ones who are exposed to the most egregious treatment. And since they are the ones living in the centers and having the day-to-day extended prolonged contact and all of that, they don't get to go home to a family or anything. I think that definitely is true, but I think the experience of supernumeraries is still really, really significant and deserves to be talked about. And I am really happy to see that people are sharing their experiences. This commenter says, "For me, the love bombing was dinners at the center, trips for ice cream, or pilgrimages one-on-one with numeraries, movie nights, special attention after meditation, and circle. I was an awkward, nerdy 14-year-old, and I ate it up. Then when I joined, it was a bit of a rude shock to be dropped like a hot potato by those friends I'd made, because now we weren't allowed to have particular friendships. I come from a large family where the fight to be heard and seen was a battle. Suddenly, I'm thrown into an environment which superficially appears to be all about the individual. This was intoxicating for an otherwise invisible child, fourth youngest of 13 kids. I was in the training school and almost immediately befriended by a numerary and a Nax who had the task of recruiting me. They had slightly different roles. The Nax focused on telling me wonderful stories about the first Nax to join Opus Dei and then the amazing love and respect that Escriva had for the Nax. This Nax would do lots of walks, but mostly rosaries with me outside the center, and it was great to just get out for an hour and have a break from work. She was nice, but I felt she was leading me, and I tried to distance myself from her. But then along comes the numerary. She was relentless. I was groomed by her. She used to give me treats and little gifts, nothing of any real value, just things she had brought from Spain. Yes, she was Spanish. I was 16. She was possibly late 30s. She had highlighted gray hair. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. She wore beautiful clothes and always smelled of nice perfume. I was totally smitten by her difference, so she easily got me to start doing prayers, going to daily mass, and engaging in circles before any of the other recruits. I felt so seen, so special, and I'd go so far as to say I felt loved, and all I wanted was to be like her, so I would have done anything for her. No time was wasted in getting me to see that, like her, I might have a vocation, despite me not seeing it, but of course, she was smarter and prettier than me, so she would know, right? Every day, she would talk about my need to ask for permission to join as a Nax, not explaining that there was, in fact, no other option available to me. Now, I just want to point out that these comments that I have read have all been from people who say that they were targeted for recruitment from a very, very young age. I just want to point that out. Pay attention to that. I mean, that's something that we already know, that Opus Dei wants to recruit young people. This is the proof, because they're talking about it right here. I finally asked for the permission. She then took me to the chapel, told me that I had to kiss the floor, say the greeting, and was now obliged to do all the norms that the others did. And with that, she unceremoniously dumped me. I was no longer allowed to take walks or do chats with her. I was put in a different work department. The only gift she gave me after that was the Silas, which she threw into my hand and laughed as she ran away. I was devastated and felt abandoned, yet again, discarded, and filled with self-loathing. I believed I was not lovable or deserving of her care anymore. I watched in devastation as she focused her love and attention on the next recruit. It just makes me really, really, really sad, because I think in these comments, you can see reflected the fact that these people were looking for something more, some sort of fulfillment, community, love, because for whatever reason, they weren't getting it from their families. And Opus Dei was there, poised to take advantage of that and snatch them up and take advantage and exploit their desire to belong and to be loved, which is a very human desire. And I think it's really, really sick that Escrivá took advantage of that when he created Opus Dei. And I have no doubt that, he is the one to blame for this behavior. Because again, he is the fountain from which all ills flow. It's so hurtful. It's strange that Opus Dei markets their apostolate as true friendship, when in fact all members of Opus Dei are given indications on which friends to spend more time with, as they are good candidates. It's not something that appears to be the case. It is actually the case, and I am sure many here, can confirm that as ex-members. Some members are truly nasty, and others are weak and just obedient. Regardless, it's horrible to be on the other end of it. They do it to ex-members too. Once you are not of use to them, you're dead to them, invisible. I honestly wish I could give you a big hug and remind you that it's not you, it's them. The culture of Opus Dei that you're surrounded by can really make you feel like you're the crazy one. You're not. You're just genuine and probably not easily manipulated, and that doesn't suit them. P.S. I was love bombed with lots of attentions after meditations, interest in my life and hobbies, invitations to events and community service projects, one-on-one time with a numerary. I was starved for attention, and I lapped this all up. I was a student at one of Opus Dei's hospitality centers. I was befriended by an adult numerary who was 24 years of age. I was a child of 15 years of age. This befriending followed me asking a few curious questions about numeraries and their lifestyle, etc., and then things moved quickly. I was separated from my peers, given extra attention, made to feel special, taken for walks and chats, shared little giggles with my recruiter, got loads of smiles from the other numeraries, etc. I felt really special. What I had previously revealed about myself through normal daily conversations about my personal situation was carefully manipulated and presented back to me in the form of a vocation, i.e., if you follow your vocation, blank would improve, etc. I was impressed. This was followed by a suggestion that I should have a chat with a priest about Opus Dei and the Father. The priest was ready and waiting for me in the confessional at a time outside of his normal routine. I was told to go in. He already knew about my curiosity about Opus Dei, which surprised me. Again, the word vocation was mentioned, as was the term assistant numerary. I felt unique and special. My recruiter's language then turned to, if you do not follow your vocation, blank will get worse. You will be unhappy all of your life and will go to hell. I was beginning to feel frightened. The special treatment continued. I mentioned to my recruiter that I wanted to speak to my family about Opus Dei, but I was instructed not to, as they would not understand our life. I felt included into the family of Opus Dei. I felt wanted. She started to question my family, raise doubts about them, etc. This made me feel superior to my own family. At this point, I was doing all of the norms, and I was separated from my peers and working only with NACs. I was fully isolated, frightened, and ripe for the picking. I was powerless. The process of whistling was fully engineered and had only taken 6 weeks from my first curious questions about Opus Dei. I was taken inside by an older NACs near the oratory. I was given a paper and pen and told to write that I wanted to join as a NACs. I wrote that horrible letter submissively. I was totally devastated. There were many numeraries in the center that day. As soon as I wrote the letter, they all rushed to me and were screaming and hugged me. They all knew beforehand, apparently. I was in shock and reeling. I was captured. My recruiter turned cold. The love bombing ended. My 7 years of devastation and extreme loneliness were only starting. My heart just hurts. for these people, especially because they're so young and they have their whole lives ahead of them. And once Opus Dei gets their claws in you, you are just truly never the same. Your perception of the world, very likely your perception of religion, is going to be completely warped. It's not the good holy thing that everybody wants to believe that it is. It's so plain. It's so obvious. Now, this post is pretty interesting because it is again talking about numerary assistants, which there are former numerary assistants in this community. So I'm always very keen to hear about their experiences, because finding out about numerary assistants and the things that they went through was one of the first things that caught my attention and gripped me and made me want to talk about Opus Dei, particularly what I was reading on websites like Opus, Libris, and Odan. So this post says, today's autobiographical report from a Nax who left in 2016 at age 22 and a half after having whistled at 14 and a half in Spain. Translated by Google Translate from Opus Libros. Most current conditions of auxiliary numeraries, MPS, date Friday, 01 September 2023, item 077, auxiliary numeraries. I have been reading this page for many months now, and it has helped me in many ways. I have yet to write my testimony. I was an auxiliary numerary from 14 and a half to 22 and a half. I left Opus Dei in 2016. Therefore, I can offer a relatively up-to-date vision of the conditions that were offered to you as an auxiliary. University degree. We all studied a university degree, although it's true that none of the assistants I met studied a particularly long one, medicine or technical one, architecture, engineering, mathematics. I studied humanities, and then I extended a year because I began to take more subjects to get philosophy at the same time. My getting 2 degrees was fully approved by the directors. I imagine they wanted a token assistant with an exemplary academic career, and it would be convenient for them to train me so that I could later give classes or talks. Giving training or formation talks. I saw some auxiliaries who gave talks in a monthly retreat or retreat course, but never in circles. It must have been something new because they seemed nervous, and it happened very occasionally. Employment contract and salary. While we were working at the center, combining this with university studies, we had an employment contract. Later, when they sent me to a club and I worked in the same center during administration hours, I also had a work contract. Now, if I had to go to replace some emergency in small houses, men's centers, those were not a labor contract, and I do not remember if they paid me. And I would wonder how often that happens. How often are numeraries or numerary assistants having to go work somewhere else that they've never been before to fill in a gap or supply a need because for whatever reason it's not being met? I would be really curious to know how common that is, because not having a labor contract for work is a huge deal. That's a problem. I would like to recover a contract to see the details of the condition they offered us. I remember the money was very little, 6 or 7 euros per house, more so 6 than 7. What I do remember is that before I went to Pamplona to study, in the summers I helped in a small house in my city, and there I do not remember a work contract. There was a lot of demand. And these facts are what I remember about this so far. Being a traumatic time in my life, my brain has tried to turn the page, and there are many things that have simply been erased from my head. Thanks to having regularly read all of your entries, on Opus Libris, they are referring, I have realized that I had not yet cut my umbilical cord with people from Opus Dei in Pamplona. Doing so will help me to embark on a new phase in life without still having spheres of the brain conditioned by the deformation I received and without feeling constantly guilty. A hug to all. So this is the condition of treatment of numerary auxiliaries, numerary assistants in Opus Dei today, as recently as 2016. Now, it's possible that certain things have changed, particularly in light of the allegations levied against Opus Dei by the 43 former female members of Opus Dei, especially in South America, considering the fact that that is where this thing kind of broke in Argentina. Perhaps now they are honoring work contracts, but I kind of tend to doubt it. I think they are probably still, they, meaning Opus Dei, making use of any type of loophole that they can, because I get the impression that they are not real wild about paperwork and filing paperwork and keeping track of things. So I would imagine that if a center somewhere needs help, a house needs help because somebody is sick or has left the organization, and they call on a center to send them someone, I would really doubt that that individual is traveling with under, a protective contract or anything like that. If I question that. And I think that the fact that there are still, according to this individual, assistant numeraries working places without a labor contract, despite everything that has come out, is a pretty big deal. This is classic about the university degrees and the occasional giving of talks. As usual, the internal government has made these concessions without changing the basic parameters of the class system that's essentially embedded in the hierarchy. They can get a degree, but they can't have a get-together unattended by a numerary. They must be babysat. They can't hear others' chats or otherwise give each other advice. They can't be on local councils that govern NAXs, so they can't make decisions for NAXs. The NAXs can't have teachers, mainly/solely NAXs. They still must be taught by numeraries 90% of the time. They remain on the receiving end of the numeraries who are allegedly more educated and smarter. But then Opus directors allow NAXs to become somewhat educated. So those NAXs just become intensely frustrated at the situation because they are still always generally treated as if they are dumb and uneducated, all because Escriva wanted a perpetual servant class. And that is something that, again, really jumped out at me back in the early days of me learning about all of this, just how kind of antiquated and really old-fashioned the structure of Opus Dei is. And in a different post, and I can't remember if I have it up here or if it's one that's more recent, somebody made the comment that Escriva was extremely captivated by really old, like kind of monastic elements or elements of really old religious orders from like the 1700s back. And I think you can see that reflected just in the way that Opus Dei is structured today, even in the 21st century. I mean, having an entire section of people that are purely just servants, and that is their only reason for existing, even though like the entire idea of Opus Dei is to be, serving in your life. So really everybody should be under that umbrella. But no, we have to have a special category of people that are just there to wash the linens and make the meals and scrub the toilets. I mean, that's wild to me. That's always been really, really wild to me. And that's still the case. Like people are still living that lifestyle. And the other thing is that there's a lot of dehumanizing and infantilizing behavior that I think assistant numeraries specifically are exposed to. And I would be really curious to know if female numeraries versus male numeraries have felt this as well. If this is like a gender thing or if it's a class thing, because that's something that I have seen and read multiple places, this kind of idea within Opus Dei that numerary assistants are sort of silly and childlike and simple and honestly not fully human. And that was even something that Escriva himself said. Like there are documents and recordings of him talking about assistant numeraries as if they are less than human. Assistant numeraries could hold children because he didn't think that they were capable of forming real human connections and bonds. And he didn't think that they would be susceptible to holding a child and realizing that they wanted a family. That's wild, but that's in Opus Dei, and it comes again from the very beginning of the organization, from its very roots and its founder. I was taken out of the training school before I had finished the official training. It was supposed to be a 2-year course, but because I had joined only months after starting, I turned 16 years in June, and by October I was already a member. I was taken out to help in the small houses. For years and years after, I literally begged to get a qualification and was told no. Quote, "You don't need it. The proof was in my work. I was a very good worker." Eventually they conceded and allowed me to go to college to get a professional qualification that was state recognized. Just one catch: I had to be accompanied by a numerary. This was a real kick in the teeth, but I accepted it because I was desperate to normalize myself. Although it was still a long way off, this was in reality the beginning of the end for me, and was the crack that I used to chip away at to get to freedom. So I think it's really interesting that this individual wanted to advance themselves and further themselves, and you would think an organization that is interested in having quality members would be behind something like that, but clearly it was not. And you really have to wonder if that is because Opus Dei doesn't want people to realize how bad they have it. Like, if they're worried that if their free labor escapes the coop and gets out into society and sees how real people are treated, how people who have real jobs are treated with dignity and respect, then maybe they might not want to be an Opus Dei anymore and they might leave. I have to imagine that that's probably cause for some concern. And again, I think that is reflected here very, very clearly, and it's really sad. I recall one Sunday afternoon, we were all supposed to go for a walk from the residence. It was all planned. We had our coats on over our dirty uniforms, and we were ready to go. Then the directress disappeared off with another Nax to do the famous chat. After waiting for a considerable length of time, in amazement at the disregard of the directress, myself and another long-serving Nax decided to go ahead with our walk on our own. We knew we were breaking the rules, but we were at the stage of not caring. Keep in mind that I was in my early 20s and the other Nax was in her late 30s. So off we went for about 45 minutes. And when we got closer to the residence on our return, we started to get afraid of the reception we would get. Upon entering the residence, we were both taken away separately for questioning by the directress and the sub-directress. The questioning went on longer than the walk. Where were we? What if we were kidnapped? Why did we go? And I loved this one. What did we talk about? Blah, 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 blah. We had to go to confession subsequently because we were told to, and I recall the priest said to me that the Father never wanted us to be on our own, and we had to respect that. I remember it being a good day at the same time, the day we savored freedom for 45 minutes and enjoyed every bit of it. Well, damn. The Father. I am 99.999% sure that that priest was not talking about our Father in heaven. He was talking about Escriva. Because we must remember that Opus Dei is the holiest institution on earth, the only institution worth being in if you are a good, pious Catholic person, and, well, Escriva is just, the Mac Daddy, the dandy of them all. He's, the guiding light. Somebody asks, what then became of the other one who took this leisurely walk with you without the company of the numeraries? Being more mature in years, did she get questioned also like you, and did she stay on after you in Opus Dei? They responded and said, thank you for your inquiry. After our walk, the older Nax got questioned and interrogated just like me. We never spoke about it to each other afterwards, as we were told not to. But it wasn't the only time that we both broke the rules together. On rare occasions, we were allowed to take the bus to do our monthly recollection. I recall buying ice cream with our bus money instead of taking a linking bus and run to make up the time. We ensured to have coffee in the morning and afternoon when the Nooms were not around, and we would regularly let off steam about our situation whenever we got the chance and say what we were feeling about our lives. As far as I know, that Nax is still in. I think she found a way of coping by snatching moments of joy here and there. I often think about her, and like many other ex-members, I was not permitted to get in touch with her because I was told not to. And even now, if this person wanted to reestablish contact with that individual, they wouldn't be able to because everyone's mail is read, everyone's phone calls are screened, you can't go anywhere without someone else being with you, and as they said in their original post, once they got back, one of the biggest concerns for the director and subdirector were, what were you talking about? What could you possibly have to talk about out there? Because I think everybody kind of realizes that they are sitting on a powder keg, and it is just a matter of time until something lights it and it all goes off in everyone's faces. This is an interesting post about whether or not Opus Dei is growing or diminishing, and that's something I've kind of wondered about myself. This individual says, all signs that I'm aware of point to institutional decay and decline. Can we get a hallelujah? Zero signs that I am aware of point to institutional growth or health. While Opus Dei could turn things around, and such comebacks are not unprecedented, I am not aware of anything that suggests that Opus Dei is actually starting to pull off such a turnaround. What is possible is not probable. Put differently, I think the other user is sufficiently pessimistic. Signs of decline include closing of centers, consolidation of regions, significantly fewer priests being ordained than in past decades, many anecdotes regarding empty centers, breakdown of discipline among numeraries to keep them from leaving. More of these indicators are anecdotes from Opus Libris and the subreddit, but some are based on personal knowledge. Also, the current rewrite of the statutes is potentially very important. It is possible that the Vatican will force Opus Dei to, one, make it very clear to its lay people that they aren't actually a part of Opus Dei, and two, make the involvement of lay people much looser and more voluntary. If so, it is hard to predict what effect this will have. It could significantly erode lay people's trust in the institution, causing a mass exodus. But more likely, the directors will likely just spin things as, quote, it's not a big deal and nothing has changed, and because the lay people have a great trust in the directors, they will believe the directors and just carry on. To avoid that second outcome, the Vatican would have to be extremely clear and leave Opus Dei no wiggle room to explain the new statutes. Question is, do we think that they will do that? Leave your thoughts down below. In the end, I'm sure this will all be a very seamless episode, but I have been having so many technical difficulties. My camera keeps overheating, it keeps dying. It is all like camera tech-based problems. So if the framing is a little bit off, I just had to like get up and move a bunch of things and try to figure out why my camera shut off for like the third time. So anyway, moving on. Some people's attitudes towards this is that Escrivá faced many difficulties with Opus Dei in the beginning too, and he says that if Opus Dei is not the work of God, then God can destroy it. Again, such statements from Escrivá really show how cocky he is. It is not up to him to say what God can or cannot do, it is up to God to say/decide what he wants to do with the things on earth, even with things that were not made directly by him, but with lots of involvement of man. I think by saying this, Escrivá had made some serious errors theologically and also spiritually. He is assuming that if one day Opus Dei disbands or disappears, that will be the work of God, as an evidence that Opus Dei was not founded divinely. And if Opus Dei is never destroyed, then it is a work of God because it was founded divinely. Either way, God is responsible for everything. I think that this is spiritually and psychologically unhealthy of Escrivá and shows a lack of understanding of how God moves/intervenes with the events of the world. In addition, Escrivá, in his sayings, downplays his own responsibility and how Opus Dei is shaped and shifts the responsibility entirely to God, which masks the reality that Opus Dei is heavily centered on his person, habits, beliefs, and behaviors. I don't think that God destroys many of the man-made things/institutions on earth. From what I observe, I see that God usually allows both good and bad to coexist for a long time, like the parable of the weeds in Matthew 13. Then when it is time, he will sort things out himself, but not destroy what is good. Escrivá had lots of black and white, either or, if, then sayings, and he says them cockily, which is extremely repulsive. And in all of if-then statements, there is always an assumption that has to be sifted out and proven true to judge the validity of the statement. I feel that in reality, God doesn't work like how Escrivá thinks God does. Things always develop in ways that reveal more options than black and white, either or, if-then situations. I don't feel like I could have said anything else better. Literally, I have chills. Just like, that is so well said. And I think that this person hit the nail on the head, and they are so incredibly right. You cannot convince me that Escrivá did not know exactly what he was doing and everything that he did from day one, building Opus Dei up from the ground. I think it was very, very calculated, and I think that he had the long game, which again is something that is alive and well in the character of Opus Dei today. And it's just really, really, really interesting and kind of galvanizing for me to have the things that I've suspected confirmed by people who have first-hand knowledge. You know, this isn't a news article from the AP or the Daily Mail or whatever. This is an account and a perspective from someone who actually lived it. And that is why I think this is so valuable and why I wanted to spend time going over this in this video with you guys today, because I think we have to listen to the words of the people who have lived through this, because therein lies the real truth. While in Spain and other parts of the world, centers have closed and not been matched by the opening of new centers, in the USA, for nearly every center that's closed recently, a new St. Raphael Center or school has opened in a different area. That will change in 15 years or so when more nooms start dying. Yeah, that's kind of something that I wondered about myself, because there is an ebb and flow to everything, just to life in general. And when you're looking at an organization and how many people they do or do not have at one particular time, I mean, these organizations, I think, tend to, in a way, mimic what is happening in like mainstream society as a whole. And a lot of countries, the United States included, have a bit of an aging population right now, which means that there are fewer people, younger people, to step into the roles that these people who are aging out used to occupy. I think it stands to reason that that probably goes for Opus Dei as well. But in everything, I think there is a pendulum that swings in politics, in social issues, in religion. And I think that if Opus Dei can hang on, which it has expressed every intention of doing, then at some point it will recover everything that it has lost. I think it's just a matter of time until we see that. If we're alive long enough to see that, if Opus Dei is not completely shut down, I think that is probably what will happen. If I had to like think logically about it and kind of play like devil's advocate a little bit. To be clear, that is not what I want to have happen. But if we're being realistic and honest, I think that that is a pretty likely scenario. Let me know what you think. There could be a leveling off given the influx of new numeraries from supernumerary families. There definitely are young families having many children where both spouses are supers, which kind of goes back to what I just said. I guess I stress that I think the USA is at a critical juncture and a lot depends on what is happening in the next 20 years. I do know that Rome expects the USA to save the work internationally because it's considered better off than places like Spain. Regrettably, it's possible for an entity to be institutionally unhealthy yet still continue to exist for a long time, especially when there are temporal goods provided through it which attract people, power, wealth, social status. And power and wealth and social status are really important things here in the United States. We live in a capitalistic economy and a capitalistic society. And who you are, who you know, what you drive, and the kind of house that you live in, the school that you attended, the schools where you send your children, these things can be very, very important to certain people in certain settings. And especially so in the United States. So I agree with investigating Opus Dei and what they are saying. I always come back to the comparison with the Jesuits. Huge declines since the 1950s, but not down and out yet. Also, they were abolished in the past, but came back. I agree that if the Pope issues another motu proprio that puts the laity into a canonical configuration independent from the priests and or that requires Opus to remove major international practices, especially the chat and community life of numeraries, then it could be a game changer. I was overly pessimistic in that I did not expect the Vatican to act, issuing that second motu proprio a few weeks ago. So it may be that the Pope will act further and break down the strict observance and control over the celibates which have allowed Opus Dei to function. And that's a really good point as well. I would definitely consider myself pessimistic towards the Vatican most of the time when it comes to waiting to see if they are going to act on something appropriately or take the steps necessary to correct something. I definitely have been one of those people who's like, I don't know, we'll wait and see. And especially with Opus Dei, just because of everything that I know about Opus Dei's relationship with the Vatican. But like investigating Opus Dei said, the Pope has done some things that were a little bit surprising and that people were not really expecting. So this thing is by no means over, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see how it all plays out. And like I keep saying, I just hope that the right people in the right places do the right thing at the right time. This is pretty interesting, and again, a really intelligent and concise response. So this user asks, here is my understanding of how you see the current situation of the work in the U.S. The work in the U.S. is in maybe a slow decline. The average age of numeraries is increasing, but there is no mass exodus at all. The work just needs to hold out for the next 10 or 15 years because there could be potentially a flourishing of vocations due to all the young people in the St. Raphael work right now. So Opus Dei schools and centers and that kind of thing. Parents who are supernumeraries who send their children to Opus Dei schools, I mean, it's a crop ripe for the picking if Opus Dei decides to act on it. My question is, what has changed? Put differently, why isn't the work reaping the benefits right now of St. Raphael work with kids from 10 or 15 years ago. Why the need to wait? Why the gap? Since the 80s and perhaps earlier, the work has encouraged large families, formation, indoctrination of kids, clubs, camp circles, etc. It isn't like get the children of supernumeraries into activities at the center is a new concept. Is there just a higher volume of younger supernumeraries? Please help me understand what is going on and what is different now. So they say, the people now over the age of 55 or 60 whistled without themselves being the children of supers, as well as some who were children of supers. The work benefited from the generally large families with American Catholicism and the strong Catholic educational and parish systems that existed in the 1950s and 1960s, i.e., ordinary Catholics were pretty thoroughly catechized, were taught Latin in high school and earlier, and so on, as you know. But I'm writing this for any random person from the internet. Beginning in the 1970s, things started to change in American Catholicism, with many religious leaving their orders and consequently Catholic colleges and high schools closing and so on. There was also a catechetical gap from about 1973 to 2000. I'm sure you know all of this. Anyway, as you also know, the situation gradually changed inside the church within the mid to late 1990s, seeing a kind of return to the catechesis at the local levels, an eventual trickle down from the JP2 onto seminarians and publishing of the new catechism, though it was by no means a uniform return and was partly located in the charismatic movement to which Opus is generally allergic. And also, by the time there was a return to the doctrine at the local levels and the church at large, the surrounding culture had progressed farther along the road towards liberalism, away from the general moral wholesomeness of the 1960s and 50s. So the situation is that since around 2000 to 2005, Opus thinks of itself as mainly reliant on only the children of supers or select cooperators for their vocations of all types, of nooms especially, but also of supers and associates and naxes. And this perception is based on experience of only certain kinds of people having the right requirements to whistle and actually persevering. Yeah, because the whole idea of the vocation is kind of fabricated. Yes, somebody can have a vocation to a very specific, stringent lifestyle, and I do believe that people can have vocations to lead a monastic, sort of sheltered type of existence. I do think that that is common. I don't, though, think that it is quite as common as Opus Dei would have you believe. I don't think that any young person that they talk to just magically must have a vocation to join Opus Dei, and that Opus Dei is just, for some reason, really, really good at finding people who have this latent vocation that just needs to be encouraged by Opus Dei. I think that that is probably not the case. But it doesn't matter, because if they can get them in, then that's all that matters. So yeah, bottom line, there may be more young supers whistling now than there were in the 1960s through the 2000s, because when the Regent started, young supers were not a huge priority, since you could pluck nooms off of trees more or less, i.e. from parishes and Catholic high schools and colleges, etc. And through to the early 2000s, there were still attempts to find numeraries that way, focusing on the conservative parishes and colleges. Then eventually they sort of gave up on that and started thinking one generation out. I'm talking about the USA with they. At least there has been a concerted strategic goal of getting young supers for at least the past 10 years. I don't know the actual number of people in their 20s and 30s whistling as supers from the 1960s through the 2000s. This is just my sense. But regardless of whether there are more or less compared to earlier decades, you don't need a huge quantity of young supers, given that the ratio of numeraries to supers can be exponential through breeding, i.e. one super who whistled in 1960 had 6 kids, of whom 1 or 2 are numeraries and 3 are supers. Those 3 supers each have 6 kids. The next generation, we have 3 to 6 numeraries, and so on. In Latin America and Spain, it's not extremely rare for one supernumerary couple to have 10 or 12 children, of whom all 10 or 12 are numeraries. I've met multiple families like that. Wow. That comment just kind of like took me by surprise. I was just like reading, and then my like mental comprehension caught up, and I like realized what I had just read. In Latin America and Spain, it's not extremely rare for one supernumerary couple to have 10 or 12 children, of whom all are numeraries. I've met multiple families like this. That is crazy. That would be like having a family, a large Catholic family of 10 to 12 children, and every single one of those children entering the priesthood, for example, assuming they're all boys. That is like, statistically, I feel like that is really odd. I feel like that's really, really, really potentially unnatural. In any case, my claim is not that there will be as many Nooms in the future as there are right now, given the cultural factors above, just that there could end up being a leveling off after the people who were raised in the 1960s die out, with the remaining number being maintained through inbreeding supers. Perhaps, eventually, subsequently, there could be a further increase of numeraries to closer to the earlier levels, given the exponential factor, but that would depend on a number of contingencies. Yeah, because that's assuming that you, in the United States, Opus Dei could effectively market themselves to conservative Catholic families going to like conservative churches. Because, I mean, you have to assume, given Opus Dei's sort of aversion to post-Vatican II stuff, that would be people that they would be attracted to recruiting. And that's assuming that you can get into those parishes and do that effectively, because that's where those big families are going to be. And I'm not exactly sure that they're going to be able to do that. But that does not mean that they can't do it. And I have learned by now not to put anything past Opus Dei, because if you think that they can't do something or won't do something, you are already wrong. And then this person says, "Thanks for your reply. Opus Dei, brought to you by the exponential power of breeding." Trademarked. Worthy of t-shirts. This post, what are the most problematic issues, in your opinion? I grew up with parents who were in Opus Dei and went to an Opus Dei school. I didn't have any influences in my childhood outside of Opus Dei. Oof, rough. Due to this upbringing, I learned about Catholicism and religion in general through the Opus Dei perspective, which we know now is going to differ pretty significantly from the rest of mainstream Catholicism, even from a conservative Catholic who might be more inclined to be in line with the things that Opus Dei teaches. Even in that, there's going to be a drastic difference, because Opus Dei just likes to put their own fun spin on everything and make sure that they are at the center of the universe, always. I joined Opus as a child at 15 years old and left 8 years later. I stopped practicing any religion not long after this, as I found it difficult to tease them apart. And that, I think, is really, really significant and really sad. I had an interesting conversation with someone earlier this week about this very thing, about people who are raised Catholic or convert to Catholicism and then end up joining Opus Dei, and then the differences between people who leave Opus Dei and completely abandon religion entirely versus people who leave and then find that their faith is strengthened once they leave. I think that there's something, again, really interesting psychologically at play there. And I understand why someone might be more inclined to leave religion after leaving Opus Dei, because of the way Opus Dei positions and kind of markets itself to people within the organization. Opus Dei is this like pie in the sky thing that's like equivalent to and potentially even greater than God. So I'm not surprised that when someone realizes that that is in fact false and a completely false narrative, that they would just be done with religion entirely. But that's not always the case. Sometimes people go through that and are strengthened in their faith. Instead, they come out and find that the version of Catholicism that Opus Dei was teaching them was sort of a stunted and faded interpretation of what it really is, and they found a lot more fulfillment once they left. And I think that's interesting. I think people who come out and remain Catholic could be tempted to say, well, people who leave were never true Catholics to begin with, if Opus Dei is enough to break your faith. But I would counter that by saying that, for one thing, everybody processes trauma differently. And just because someone responds not as aggressively to a situation as someone else does not mean that the trauma is any less severe. It's not a competition. Everybody is allowed to respond to and process things in their own way. And also, I really push back against the idea that if someone leaves a group or an organization or a religion, the people who remain all say, oh, well, they were never a true Catholic, a true vegan, a true Protestant, whatever the case may be. I really push back against that. And there's actually a term for that, and it's called the no true Scotsman's fallacy. And we can look it up right now and I can tell you more about it. So the no true Scotsman fallacy is the attempt to defend a generalization by denying the validity of any counter examples given. By changing the definition of who or what belongs to a group or category, the speaker can conveniently dismiss any example that proves the generalization doesn't hold. So in this case, you could say, well, so-and-so left Opus Dei. Well, they were never really a member of Opus Dei to begin with. They never really embraced the true charism of Opus Dei, and they were afflicted by bad faith, rather than saying, that's interesting. I know two other people who have also left. I wonder what's going on there. And of course, you could apply this to anything. If you have a really common one that a lot of people see play out in social media, if you have someone who was a huge influencer for a particular style of eating, like say the carnivore diet or the vegan diet, and then they come out a few years later and basically shun that particular lifestyle choice, and they have all these reasons why. Maybe their health was failing and their blood work was going down the toilet and their doctor was telling them that they were going to die and their hair was falling out and whatever else was happening, really terrible things, and they found healing once they changed their lifestyle or changed their diet. It's very common to see people on the inside still saying, oh, well, so-and-so was never a true vegan to begin with. I think we have to accept the fact that someone can wholeheartedly buy into, believe, support, have faith in an ideology, a religion, a lifestyle, whatever it may be, and that something externally or internally can happen that puts that person on a different trajectory, that basically removes them from that situation or that ideology, whether or not they want to. I would imagine that if you asked a lot of people who have lost their faith after leaving Opus Dei whether or not that was something that they wanted to happen, 99% of the people would probably say no. Didn't want to lose my faith. I was looking for community. I was looking for friendship. I was looking for a sense of belonging because I never had that my entire life. To say that they were never a true Catholic, I think is an insult to their experience and their victimhood and also their survivorship. And I don't think that it's being honest, and I also think that it bypasses and ignores the real crux of the issue. It's very simple to say Joe was never really a member of Opus Dei, or Joe left the Catholic Church so he was never a real Catholic, and then go on with your life. It's much easier to do that than to say Joe no longer follows the Catholic faith. What happened to Joe? Where did that religion fail him? Something is at play there, and I don't think it's just the fact that someone was assuming a facade and play acting at being something without actually believing in it. You don't have people dedicating years and years and years and years of their life and their effort and their time and their blood and their sweat and their tears to something like this if they don't actually believe in it. That would be insane. So just some food for thought there. Be aware of the no true Scotsman's fallacy, because I see it happen a lot. Anyway, going back to the post after that. I have friends who were also raised in an Opus Dei bubble, but they did not join, so never experienced the harmful customs and expectations put on members. They're still supportive of it and will send their kids through the Opus Dei schools too. Again, this kind of comes back to what I was just talking about. Just because you did not have a negative experience and you do not understand why someone has a negative reaction to something that you believe in or care about or think is good does not mean that their experience is not still valid. It is possible, and I think you should try to accept this as much as you can, it is possible that perhaps your experience is not the golden standard. And for some reason, whatever reason it may be, you were fortunate enough not to be exposed to the negativity and the darkness that other people have been. They see it as ensuring their kids get a solid Catholic education, and people in Opus are doing what is expected of all Catholics who are not quote-unquote lukewarm. What are your thoughts on what separates Opus Dei from being a practicing Catholic in a negative way? I'm not talking about conversations or comments from individuals, but more systemic issues that would warn you off wanting to join. What are the most problematic practices of Opus Dei? For me, it was definitely the cult of personality, escriva, and the following prelates, as well as the weekly chat by someone who is unqualified for spiritual direction, who uses it as a means for control rather than spiritual accompaniment, and the amount of financial contribution we are pressured to give, and the existence of the category of naxes of the institution. I think that pretty well breaks it down. Those are, and I would say, the biggest problems for me too. I also think that it's really, really sad that parents, who I'm sure want only the best things for their children, think that sending them to an Opus Dei school is the way to do it. This is something that I talked about whenever I reacted to the Four Corners documentary about the two Parad schools in New South Wales, Australia. I am sure that these parents are not purposefully trying to set their kids up for failure or trying to ensure that they lose their faith. They probably think that putting them in an Opus Dei school is the surest way to ensure that that does not happen. But we have a growing body of evidence to show the contrary. And I think that if parents, Catholic parents, understood what was going to happen to their child and their child's faith formation from being involved in something like this, they would probably be a little bit more reluctant to enroll them. And again, I don't know how many parents watch my content. I don't know if you watching this now have school-age children, and whether or not you found my channel because you were looking for information about Opus Dei. But I beg you, if you are, reconsider. There are other ways for your child to get a good education, and there are other ways for you to educate them in the faith than Opus Dei. In my humble opinion, the most egregious aspect of the work is how inculcated complete and total adherence to every arbitrary rule and law is. It completely destroys an individual's ability to think critically and exercise free will, plus the fear. It seems to be there is an inordinate degree of fear within Opus Dei about everything. It is a nursery for vulnerable adults, which is a line from the International Ecclesiastical Institutional Complaint that I went over last time. For me, the most problematic issue is the strict, undying, and unquestioning obedience that they impose on the members, but particularly the numeraries, knacks, and the associates. This obsession about obedience predicated on divine will expressed through the directors is the perfect formula for abuse. It really, really is. This also nullifies critical thinking, which leads the entire organization to be blinded to practices that should and could be corrected. Imagine if members could ask questions. This would be like crucibles that can purify the spirit of Opus Dei and burn out the practices that are harmful to souls, making it a true force for good. But this incessant idolatry of the founder and the inability to critique his rules and the rules of the directors have caused this organization to generate to the status of a cult. And I would have a question for you. Do you think that Opus Dei was always intended to be like this, was always an organization with cult-like tendencies from the very beginning? Or do you think that that is something that has happened over time? I am of the opinion that it's been intentional and that it has been from the beginning. I don't think that, for all the fancy words, there was ever any question of where this thing would eventually go. And I think that if you look back at the history of the organization and its interactions with the Vatican, that's pretty clear. In the very early days before Opus Dei managed to get in the Vatican's pocket, the Vatican was pretty suspicious of the organization and was pretty reluctant to grant it the status of a personal prelature. We have JP2 to thank for that, because previous pontiffs were not willing to give them that. And I think that there's a reason for that. A group of somebody's guts were telling them not to trust this thing, and it's just too bad that that wasn't acknowledged more completely. I was racking my brain to think of an answer, and then I realized I also went to an Opus Dei school from 5 to 18 years old. I haven't known anything else. Whilst none of my family is Opus Dei, they only seem to hate that they bring up and push the topic of vocation so early when people are still children, and then maybe the overt corporal mortification. Otherwise, they're just as strict on the rules of the faith, hence why my dad, one of 12 children, and I am one from 7. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting, because earlier I had sort of hypothesized that I didn't know how successful Opus Dei would be at getting into these like conservative Catholic circles. But I mean, I guess all you have to do is convince a parent with a school-age child that you're going to offer them the best possible education that you can, and you're off to the races. And I do know that more Opus Dei centers and schools are popping up across the United States. I have seen this with my own 2 eyes, and I want to talk about it, but I'm not exactly sure how to tackle it, because I At the risk of sounding a little bit conspiratorial, I feel like there is something really, really significant going on here in the United States with Opus Dei, but I cannot, for the life of me, tease out exactly what it is. As soon as I'm able to do that, I'm going to talk about it. But there is a huge presence here in the United States in education and in local politics too, and it's really, really interesting. I agree with the comments here made about the aggressive recruitment and predatory policies to pursue children and minors by Opus Dei adults. It has to be the most problematic aspect of Opus Dei's culture in my mind, and I would agree. It's immoral, exploitative, and deeply unethical. And also, it preys upon, in my opinion, people who are perhaps mentally unwell, who are attracted to extremely rigid religions or rigid organizations like Opus Dei. And this is, again, something that I was talking with someone about earlier this week, kind of that link between mental illness and adherence to a really strict lifestyle, like being an Opus Dei. I queried in my last video what that might say about human psychology and what inferences could be made there. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a background in psychology or sociology, so I am learning as I go as far as that is concerned. But the person that I was talking to said that in their opinion, there is 100% a link, and that so many of the issues that we see in Opus Dei with the treatment and mistreatment of people would be completely handled if people were required to demonstrate that they are mentally in control of their faculties, that they are operating from a place of understanding and from free will prior to committing to join an organization like Opus Dei. They said that they think that this should be a standard across the board for all religious orders and organizations like this, and I agree. I think that it would solve a lot of problems, but I don't know how you make that happen. In conjunction with this, as in previous posts, Opus directors alienate the parents of the child as early and as possible to groom the child to join Opus Dei. Again, a deeply unethical practice. I recall science being published finding that people's brains did not fully develop until their early 20s. But no, Opus Dei directors knew better and dismissed the science immediately. They stated that young people from 14 and a half years of age were well capable of making life decisions and to commit to Opus Dei as fully celibate members for the rest of their lives. And I think that that is absolutely insane. I do not think that you should be allowed to make permanent decisions about your life until you are of legal age. 18, 21, 16, whatever it is, whatever your country of origin, whatever the law there is, that law exists for a reason. And I think that encouraging young people to join this organization at such a young age is a really, 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 really bad move. It is so unethical, and I agree with Speedy Orange Cake 100%. This is interesting. Investigating Opus Dei, coming in with the facts once again. Child oblates are a part of Catholic history, but more in the Middle Ages and before Vatican II. The practices that Opus Dei have are early 20th century religious orders of strict obedience. So yeah, they are not normal practices, but they are Catholic practices. The first problem is that these practices were never intended for lay people. They are pretty much impossible to live out as an ordinary lay person. You have to have a church in your house so that you can roll out of bed and be at Mass super quick and devote much of your day to the pious practices. Trying to do this while having a normal job, and most especially while not living in a center, so you have to commute to Mass, creates scrupulosity. The second problem is that the practices themselves actually did need reform, even for religious life, and Opus never went through that reform because they were insisting they were not religious. I think that Escriva really wanted to have his cake and eat it too, and I think he thought that creating Opus Dei was his way to do that, but instead he's just created a mess for everyone to try to navigate and work through, including, people who join under good pretenses because they're trying to do a good thing. When did you realize that you did not have a vocation to Opus Dei? I was a minor when I was exploited by Opus Dei to join as a Nax, so I believed everything I was told. I never asked questions, I never critiqued anything, I obeyed blindly. I believed I had a vocation to Opus Dei because I was told. And I remember what that's like to be a young person being raised in the church. Granted, I was never involved in anything like Opus Dei, but my family was very, very active in the church that we were attending when I was growing up. They're still very active, devout Catholics. And I remember what that was like, being 12, 13, 14 years old and being told something by a priest or a teacher or your parents and believing it, because I didn't have access to the internet. I didn't have any perspective of the world. I barely had any sense of myself. I'm still growing and developing and trying to learn and understand the world. And if the things that I'm being told sound pretty good, I'm probably going to believe them. And I understand exactly what that's like, because especially when someone is speaking from a position of holy authority, not just civil authority, right? But like authority within a religious context. When someone is speaking almost as the mouthpiece of God, you just don't question what they're saying. You just, that's tantamount to blasphemy, to question someone when they are speaking to you about spiritual matters and when they are someone who is supposed to be an authority on those things. I completely understand how that happens to these kids. I mean, they just do not stand a chance. But then this user goes on to say that I was a keen observer and I watched a lot. In my early 20s, I asked my first question of my directress, and it was, where does all the money go? I want to know that too. Where does all the money go? That was it. I will never forget her answer. She told me that if I asked anything like that again, I would be kicked out of Opus Dei, I would never get a job, that no one would want me, and that my family and I would go to hell. I was in total shock. I was reeling for days after. Just for asking a very simple question, one which I myself have asked here many, many times. Where does all the money go? What you doing with all that money? I really want to know. I really, really want to know. What are you doing with it? The trust was broken. I began to see more and more contradictions, the lies, the underhanded ways, the untruths, the toxicity in my inferior life living as a Nax, to name but a few. I realized that this Catholic organization that I was dedicating my life to was not based in truth whatsoever. I was very uncomfortable for many years living a contradiction of being essentially an honest person, but perpetuating the false message of Opus Dei. Every essence of my being was telling me that Opus Dei was not the place to be. The final exit took another few extremely painful years, but I made it out relatively safely. However, there has been a sense that I abandoned my vocation, abandoned my Opus Dei family. Thankfully, this guilt has diminished over the years. I did not meet any ex-members for decades and rarely spoke about my Opus Dei experience to anyone. Sharing and talking does help. While the information that has emerged in recent years through Opus Libris, Odan, and more recently this page, the recent complaint to the Holy See on regulatory fraud, and the complaint of 43 former NACs in Argentina, is cathartic to realize that Opus Dei's creation, development, and the progression has been based on falsehoods, lies, and deception. So it is only now, after a long lifetime, that I can fully say with confidence that I never had a vocation as an assistant numerary to Opus Dei. What were your experiences of realizing that you did not have a vocation? Was it a quick realization or did it take longer? That gave me chills. The truth will set you free. It absolutely will. Because imagine if you are someone who was within this organization, and if you're watching this video and you don't have to imagine it because you lived it. I can only imagine what that would be like to realize that it's not working for you, be questioning this vocation that you ostensibly have, that you've been told from your very earliest interactions with the organization that you do have, realize that you can't stay, realize that you have to leave, and feel like not only have you abandoned God, but you've doomed yourself and your family to hell. What an incredibly, heavy thing to have to contend with. And then how absolutely beautiful and freeing and uplifting to realize that, no, actually, you were right. Your instincts were correct. To realize that you did not abandon God, that you are not doomed to hell, that nothing bad is going to happen to you because the entire thing was built on lies. I hope more and more and more people are able to reach that realization, and I hope the truth sets you free. I just do not see, I continue to not understand how someone could be involved in this organization and not come out the worse for the wear. I know that there are people who feel that they are reaping a net benefit from their involvement, but sometimes, it's sort of the frog in the hot water allegory, sometimes you don't realize, because you're so close and so involved in something, that the thing that you're so involved in is actually poisoning you, killing you, boiling you slowly alive. And I really feel that that is the case with this organization, and I think that you can see that reflected in all of these accounts and testimonies from people who gave so much to Opus Dei. And I really hope that you learned something from this, and maybe this makes you want to go and check out this subreddit a little bit more, read through some more of these accounts, and some more of these experiences, because they are pretty powerful. I think that anytime you can get the information from the horse's mouth in its own words, that can only be a good thing. So anyway, that is going to be where I'm going to end it for today. Thank you so much for coming along, and if you made it this far, for listening to all of these stories. I appreciate it for my own sake, but I more so appreciate it for the sakes of all of these survivors and others who have not either found this community or found the courage to speak out about it. I know that there's so much fear and reluctance to expose oneself to any type of negative attention from Opus Dei or anyone even closely affiliated with Opus Dei. I understand how hard that is. So if you are someone who has been active in this community, thank you. And if you have been active on any of the other communities around the world, thank you. On behalf of those who have not found their voices. That is really, really powerful. And I will continue to do everything that I can to speak on this and provide information and resources about it. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I really, really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. That helps support what I am doing here. It is a slow grind, but it is absolutely worth it. And I would love to have you on board for the ride. If you're interested in connecting with me in any way, all of my various socials are linked down below. You can also send me an email if you would like. If you are interested in speaking with me one-on-one, please do send me an email and we can make that happen. But that is it for me for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and remember, nolite te bastardes carboradorum.